Good evening, everyone.
Couple Ta'af, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay. So we're continuing with the tour in Gimel. Yeah, so it says like this. אין סומכין הקדרה בפיקת עץ לחה, דכיוון שהיא לחה ואינה ראויה להסקה, אסור לטלטלה לצורך שום דבר. אבל יבשה שראויה להסקה מותרת לכל דבר. Okay. So, right, to translate this, what is he telling you here? That don't lean the pot, right, which is full of food, on a piece of wood which is moist. Why is that? Because since it's moist, it's not really fitting for firewood. So therefore, you can't even carry it. But if it's dry, then right, it is allowed. Why is that? Because it is fitting to be firewood. So the rule is like this, right? That you can't really use moist wood for firewood because it won't catch on fire. It won't burn good. That's you got to wait till it dries out, right? So that's why he's saying that. So let's look in a bit Yosef and see. Explain, right? Explains how he explains this. Today we don't have such a thing like this, So whatever. Let's see what he says here, right? The pek amevi kadei yain. So he says over there, right? In Lamed Bet Amud Bet in Betzah, he brings the source. Tanan learns the Mishnah. En somchina tekdera bebikad pirosh Rashi kasavar lo nitunu etzim ela leasaka. Right. So he holds that wood was only allowed for firewood. The Rabbi Shimon matir, but Rabbi Shimon allows this. Perish Rashi explains that Rabbi Shimon matir delet le muktzeh. Why? Because Rabbi Shimon doesn't hold by this kind of muktzeh. He doesn't hold that it exists something like this. Ubata achi ipligu amorae, right? And then the Amoraim also argued about this, right? What is the halacha? Bechizra, klomar anaf etz. So they argued about what, like a wooden branch, shehu chad, which is like sharp, kekotz, like like a thorn, very sharp. V'rawi letok'o betzali, kamin shipud. So in other words, because it's so sharp, it is fitting for something, right? What can you do with it? You can use it as a skewer, for your meat, right? Kamin shipud v'tzlotro v'asikna, so you can roast your meat like that, right? Skewers are used until this day, right? It's a useful thing sometimes, to make a barbecue with skewers. So that's what he's saying. Okay. So he says, right, that so the conclusion of the Gemara there is like this: that if it's dry, it's allowed. If it's moist, as we said, right, not allowed. Rashi explains, Hach ilchata aliba deman deamar deitle mukse ikba aval anan k'Rabbi Shimon tzvialan v'tama alav harosh. Right, so Rashi explains, right, that which the Talmud concluded that it's forbidden. That's only the ones, according to the ones who hold that this is muktzah. But he says we don't hold that way. Rashi says. So we're not really concerned about this. But comes the Rosh, right, and argues with Rashi. So he says, right, that Rav Asher paskins that we don't hold like that. Rabbeinu Tam Piresh the Tama, and Rabbeinu Tam explains the reason is because the En Somchin Lav Mishum Muktzeh, not because of Muktzeh, Ela Mishum Gezerah Yom Tov. Right? It says it's because of Yom Tov. What does that mean? Atu Shabbat. If you come to do it on Yom Tov, you're going to come to do it also on Shabbat. So therefore, right, the rabbi said, refrain from this because of that. Like it includes over there in the Gemara, Shabbat Kuf Chavdal Amud Aleph, Umasik Hatam Dematnitin Deacha Bet Shammai. Okay, so then it concludes over there, right, that this Mishnah is Bet Shammai. Rabbi Shimon Matir ke Bet Hillel, but Rabbi Shimon allows this according to Bet Hillel. V'hadi katane shelo nitnu etzim ela le'asaka. Now, which it says, right, that wood is only allowed for firewood. Hachi perusho. What it means is like this: Shabbat lo chazu le'asaka. That on Shabbat you cannot use it for firewood. Obviously, right? You cannot start a fire on Shabbat because in Yom Tov atu Yom Shabbat. So we decreed Yom Tov because you may come to do it on Shabbat. Umaskana dishmatin. Right. So it says the conclusion over there. Ve'ilchata yeveshta shara retivasu. Again, right? That if it's dry, it's allowed. If it's moist, it's not allowed. Kaima shapir kehad demoke hatam hachamatnitin ke Bet Shammai. So it says that's according to Bet Shammai, this Mishnah. Vehad de'asa retiva alav mishum desavar ke Bet Shammai. And now what he forbade the moist wood, it's not because he holds like Bet Shammai. Lo nitnu etzim ela le'asaka, right? That wood, was only allowed because of firewood. That's what Bet Shammai holds. So he says, but Bet Hillel says like this, right? That wherever it's fitting for firewood, it's also allowed for other purposes as well. But when it comes to moist wood, which is not really fitting for for firewood, so then that they forbade that all all the way through, right? All around. Not because it's muktzeh, he says. The reason is because, if you do it on Yom Tov, you may come to do it also on Shabbat. That's the end of it. Okay. Right? That's how the two paskins, like the Rosh, whatever. Right? But this rabbi paskins like Rashi. So we have machloket, right, about this, whether it's allowed to do this or not. So what's the machloket? The machloket is only dry wood allowed or also moist wood as well? Pretty much that's the machloket, right? Okay. So he goes on. אבל הריף כתב אין סומכין את הקדרה בבקעת וכן הדלת לפי שלא ניתנו עצים אלא הסקה, right? So the Rif says like this, right, that wood was only made for firewood, right? So therefore we're not allowed to, right, use it for these purposes. What purposes are we talking about? To lay, right, the pot on top of it, so you're cooking with that. וכתב הר"ן פירוש שכיוון שאין מיוחדין אלא להסקה בלבד. So says the Ran, the way you explain is like this, the Rif, that since they're only, right, since they're only meant for firewood, then Torah kli aleim, and therefore they're not really considered to be a kli, utensil. Yesh lehem din muktzeh, they're muktzeh, he says. Legabe shar melachot, regarding other laborers, right? But he says something which is considered to be a utensil. You're allowed to use it, no problem. Right? Even for labor, because it's not really designated for that. Why? Because the rule is that you're allowed to use, utensils as firewood, even though they're not designated for that. So it says this resembles, our case resembles another case in a different place in the Talmud. That over there it says that we don't use lean, right, these pots on top of the these wood, right? The en somchina kedera bebika be'aminan dehainu tama, and there it says the reason is because mishum the gazrina yom tov atu Shabbat, right? That yom tov may lead to Shabbat. So in other words, we have here two different reasons. Some hold like this, some hold like that. Some say the reason is because you may come to do it on Shabbat. Some say the reason because it's muktzah. Okay. So then we said, right, that really the halacha is not like this Mishnah. Why? Because it's like Bet Shammai, right? We don't pass like Bet Shammai. So he says that, but they didn't mention the reason, right? That wood is only for firewood. And here, right, we didn't mention Bet Shammai. So it says here, this is the main place for this topic. Right? Why is that? Because it's place over here. It's the right place for it. So he says, therefore, we paskin like this Gemara, right, and not the one over there, right, the other place. Okay, so he says, right, Vedat Rambam Kedat Arif, right? So the Rambam, he says, holds like the Rif. Shkatav and Samchin et Kedera velo et Adelet bebikat shel Korah shelo itiru letaltel etzim b'yom tov ela le'asaka bilvad. So he holds like the Rif. What is the Rif? Right? That what? That wood was only allowed for firewood. That's it. Nothing else, right? Ad Kanashon, that's the end of it. Okay. So then he continues. ולגבי חיזרא כתב הריף כמסקנה דעסיקנא יבשה שרי רטיבה אסור ויש לתמוע עליו. So he says, right, that regarding, this חיזרא, right? So the Rif says that, as we said, right, that if it's dry, it's allowed. If it's moist, it's not allowed. So he says, there's a wonder on this, why? Since he passed like the opinion that says that wood is only given for firewood, only allowed for that purpose. So then how is it allowed to use dry? Right? To put it inside your, right, to use it as a skewer. But it's lotpo, and to roast with it. But he says the one that was forbade. The reason why he forbade was because they're only made for firewood. It says in Gemara. So he says, therefore, right, the rule is like this, that since wood is only used for firewood, right, even though that's the case, right, you're still allowed to use it as a skewer, nevertheless. Why is that? Because this kind of use, he says, resembles like firewood, it's like similar. In other words, you're putting it on the fire, basically, right? So it's kind of like similar usage. Okay. Good. So he says, right, that and that's the reason we gave there, according to one who allows, right? What difference does it make if I, right, roast with it, or right, if I, roast with its coals? Komar. So what does that mean? Kevan de tashmish zed litzlot sali. So since this usage, of roasting meat, right, like that. Who וכי מעסיק לבנורה תשמישו נמי לצלות צלי. And also, right, same thing. In other words, when he's using it as coals, he's also doing it to roast meat, right? So in other words, the usage is very similar, almost the same thing. So therefore, this usage, he says, resembles, right, using it as coals. So therefore, it's allowed. Using it as firewood, right? Whatever. Okay, so interesting. Let's go on a little bit. So then he brings this case over here. Ve'aran katav, says the Ran, ahad yaminan letiva asur. That which we said, right, that the moist wood is forbidden. Lav lememad de'tiva asur, right, lemitve be'esek gadol. So it doesn't mean that moist wood, you're not allowed to put it into a big fire. Interesting. אלא לומר, כיוון דרנטיבה לא חזה אלא על ידי תערובת, לא מן מה לי לסלוט בו, מה לי לסלוט בתערובת. So, right, so he says something interesting, right, that there is a way to use moist wood, in a fire, which is what? If you use like a mixture, of dry and moist wood, then it'll go. But if you use only moist wood, right, it will not go. So there is a way to use it. But he says, nevertheless, we don't say, right, that it's the same thing. They can use it as a mixture, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, right, we say that moist wood is not allowed. Even though there is a way to burn it, as we said, right? Okay, good. גחלתו, כיוון שאינו ראוי לצלות בגחלתו מפני עצמו כדרך שהוא צולה בו לבדו עד כאן. So that's the right. So therefore he rejects this, right? He says no, you cannot do that. That's you can't say, oh well, there's a way to do it. Yeah, there's a way, but it itself by itself it doesn't work. Okay, so then he goes on. והרמב"ם כתב פרק ב', קוץ רטוב הרי הוא כמוקצה. So he says, right, that the Rambam brings that a twig, right, which is moist, he says it's muktzeh, right, as we said. Why is that? Because it's not fitting, to burn with that, right? You can't use it as firewood. So therefore he says, you can't use it as a skewer either, because of that. It's muktzeh, So you can't make a skewer out of it. לצלות בבשר. בפרק ד' כתב, לא תיכנס אישה בין העצים ליטול מהם אוד לצלות בו, right? So he also writes in a different place, in chapter 4, that a woman should not go in, right, into, stick her hand into the bonfire, right, and take a piece of wood there, right, which is the wood that he uses for manipulating the fire, whatever, and use that, as a skewer. You cannot do that, he says. Interesting. Well, I didn't really say it right? What he's saying is like this, that he's saying a woman should not go into a pile of wood, right? Not a fire. We're talking like a pile of wood, and take one twig out of there to use it, to roast with it, to use it as a skewer, in other words. She shouldn't do that. So what's the reason why? Because it's, it's moist, right? I guess that's the reason. So he says, right, V'katav sham ha'arav ha'magid. So this rabbi says, he says that we already explained in the second chapter, as we said, right? You cannot roast with the moist wood. Right? But it says, when it comes to dry, no problem, right? Dry wood is no problem. ואפשר שאוד רוצה לומר, לדעת רבנו עץ לח ורטוב שאינו ראוי להסקה בפני עצמו, אבל עץ יבש ודאי מותר. וכן כתב רשב"א. So he's telling you, right, again, the same thing over and over. Dry is no good, dry is good, moist is no good, right? For the same reason that we already mentioned. And then he says also Rashba says this, right? Same thing, right? Okay, good. So says Bet Yosef, right? It seems to me, then so this is, you don't really need to, right, force yourself into this whole thing there. What does that mean? Right? Ela ud etz yaveshu. So he says, really, the truth is, what it's talking about there is not a moist piece of wood. He says it's talking about a dry piece of wood. So if that's the case, right? Why is it forbidden to use it to roast with it as a skewer? Right? So he says, אפילו אחי אין סולין בו ולא דמה לחיזה שהוא חד ודק כמו שיפוט ואינו צריך לתיקון כלל. כילכך כיוון דייבש הוא שראוי להסקה סולין בו אבל עוד כיוון דאב הוא ולא חזה דשיפוט ולא תיקון אלא על ידי דחק אף על גב דייבש הוא שראוי להסקה אין סולין בו. So he explains, right, the reason why you can't use it is not because it's moist. The reason is because it's not sharp, so therefore it's not really fitting to be a skewer. It's like, got a thick kind of a, it's thick, so you can't really stick it into a piece of meat, unless you shave it down, right? You can't do that on Yom Tov, you can't shave it down to prepare it like that. So therefore, right, that will be a problem. So therefore, this says that's the reason why you can't use it. Okay, interesting. Let's go on. So he says, ולפי זה צריך לומר שמה שנתן טעם הרמב"ם, according to this, he says, you have to say that which Rambam gave a reason, שם, שלא התירו לטלטל עצים ביום טוב, that they didn't permit, right, to carry wood on Yom Tov, אלא להסקה בלבד, only for firewood, לא כהי תמה, אלא לאין סומכין על קדרה. So he says, that's only pertaining to the issue of putting the pot on top of it. ולא הדלת בבקעה, אבל מה שכתב, לא תיכנס אישה בין העצים, ליטול בהם, ולצלות בו, לא מצר, אלא מטעמה דפרישית, right? So he says, but regarding the issue of using that piece of wood, that's for a different reason, he says. The reason is because it's thick. So it's not the same thing as the case of the pot. That's what he's saying, right? Differentiating between this and that. Okay, so that's the end of the Bet Yosef. Let's see Shulchan Aruch. That was a long one. Okay. Maybe we should have skipped it. It's not really so practical, but whatever. I did it already, so too late now. Too late to skip it. Okay. All right. I'd rather do more of the practical stuff, things which are not practical. I mean, I don't, what's the point, right? Ish shemeto. Okay, 1 second. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it says here, en somchim et hakadera velo tadelet bebikat, right? So he says, don't lean, right? In other words, don't put it on top, whatever, right? The pot, right? Or a door, he says, right? Also, right? On the bikat, right? What is a bikat? It's a piece of wood, basically, right? Let me see what the Mishnah Berurah here says. Maybe explains better what this is exactly. Well, basically, it's a piece of wood, right? Whatever, chopped wood, right? Something like that, right? So anyway, right? What is he saying here? That you shouldn't lean it on, put it on top of that. Use it to lean it or whatever. So, aval mutar litzlot bo, but you're allowed to. He says the Rama says you're allowed to roast with it. So he brings that in the name of the Rif, right? So we'll see how that fits in over here. So what's the reason why you can't, right, put this pot or this door, right, whatever, on top of this piece of wood to lean it on, lean on it, whatever, right? The reason is because, as we said, it's moist, and we only allow wood, which is fitting for firewood. So therefore, right, this is not included in that right, in that permission. That's exactly what we said. So Mishnah Berurah, right? I just saw there. He says that, but if it's dry, it's okay, right? We're talking about that it's moist. That's the reason why you can't do it. So the rule is like this, right? What do you see from here? At least we learned something, Maybe a little bit practical for us, a little bit, right? Whatever. That, if you're dealing with wood, right? On whatever in your backyard, whatever it is, right? Whatever, I don't know what you're doing there. So it says right that right, if you have moist wood, you cannot use that on Yom Tov, right? But dry wood you're allowed to use. So you know what people do, right? In order to dry the wood, they put it in the sun. The sun dries it. Like that's one way to do it. If you want to do it like relatively fast, that's what you do. So once it gets dry, then it's okay. So right. So the Rama says, right, but you're allowed to roast with it, right? Right? Also, it says, right, that you're allowed to um, use it as firewood with other wood, right? Even though you can't use it by itself, right? But the truth is, it's very interesting because in the Bet Yosef, he didn't paskin like this, right? It seems like there's a machloket here because Bet Yosef didn't allow this to use moist wood for any purpose, if I'm not mistaken, right? So let me see what the Mishnah Berurah says here. Right, so interesting, right? Mishnah Berurah here, right, explains it a little bit differently, right? He says that the Ramah is talking about dry wood. If that's the case, right, then it's very clear. We do paskin like that, right? But it doesn't, I mean, the Ramah doesn't read that way, It seems like he's talking about moist wood because he doesn't say that it's dry. Interesting. Okay, so anyway, right? So Mishnah Berurah paskins over here, you can only do that if it's dry. So I know whatever, I guess we should rely on that, right? In other words, we should understand the Ramah that way. But the Ramah is talking about dry wood. Unless we can find some other sources that hold differently, right? Whatever. But meanwhile, we'll stick with this one until we get to the other ones, right? Whatever. But right. So it seems like the Ramah is talking about dry wood. Then we understand, right? So he says, what's the reason that you're allowed to roast with it, even though you're not using it as firewood? But he says it resembles the usage of firewood. That's what we said in Bet Yosef, right? Same thing. So that fits in very well with the whole scheme here. Okay, good. That's good. And then he says, the kol sheken shemutar le'asik bo im ha'sha'atzim, right? All the more so, he says you can use it with other wood. But here's the thing, right? Now that he says this, right, you can use it with other wood. That already implies that he's talking about most moist wood, So it's hard to understand why the Mishnah Berurah understands this here as talking about dry wood. It seems like the Ramah is talking about moist wood. There's another Mishnah Berurah here. I'm going to see what he says here. Let me just see what he says. So it could be, the Mishnah Berurah here is arguing with the Ramah. He's not really explaining the Ramah, more like arguing with it. So let's see, right, what he says here. Okay, well, okay, that's a surprise. So Mishnah Berurah says something interesting, right? That he says the first part of the Ramah is talking about dry wood, and then the second part he says talking about moist wood. You know what I mean? It's really hard to to understand that because the Ramah doesn't say these things. Okay, whatever. Maybe you have to look more into the sources and see right what's going on. But anyway, right, the way the Mishnah Berurah explains it, is that moist you're not allowed to use. But right, he says that the Rama is allowing you to use it with other wood, since it'll burn all together, as a group, as a bundle, right? Whatever. Okay, but the truth is, right, that the Maran and Shulchan Aruch did not allow any of these things. He didn't allow to use moist wood for any purpose. You know what I mean? So that's very interesting. Okay, so right, that's the story there. As we said, it's not really so practical, whatever. Unless you have like a backyard there, with some, chopping some wood, whatever, right? In your house, or whatever, right? Whatever. Yeah. In New York City, we're far from that, right? We're not really. we don't live that way. Right? So we're not into that stuff. Okay. Okay, let's see if we can do another one. Right. So this is something a little bit more practical, but let's see what it says, right? If it applies to our times. Okay. Yeah. So let's read the tour over here. Says the tour, אין מבשלים בקדרות של חרס חדשות, אלא אם כן יפתיחן בתחילה, מערב יום טוב, מפני שהבישול הראשון מחזקן, right, והוא גמר תיקונם, right, it's interesting. So, right, this, I don't think this applies today, by the way. But, right, anyway, it's interesting. He says, right, that you shouldn't use on Yom Tov a new clay utensil, for cooking. Why is that? Because if it's new, the first time you use it hardens it, so it makes it like ready for use, it's like you're finishing the job of making this utensil. So therefore, right, says the tour, you shouldn't do that because you're like making a utensil like that. Okay, that's the language of the tour. So let's go to Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef, right? Where's the source for this? Right over there in this Gemara, right? Tanan, same page, right, as before. We learn the Mishnah there. So right, it says over there that we shouldn't use these plates, whatever, to roast with them, right? Because so Gemara asks over there, right? Why is that forbidden? What's the reason why? Right, so he says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hacha berafim chadashim askinan. He says, we're talking about new ones, right? Mipnei shetzarich lebatkan, so you have to check them. V'amar la mipnei shetzarich lechasman. So some say it's because you have to write chasman, whatever. We'll see what that means, right? So Rashi explains, the Parish Rashi, tzarich lebatkan im yochlu lekabel libun. Right, first you have to check if it can accept the fire, without breakage, right? Whatever. That's one opinion, right? So that's why, according to the first opinion, right, it's because they may break. And it turns out, right, that he was exerting himself for nothing, that he got nothing done there. Some say because you write, what does mean chasman? So Rashi explains, right, that means it hardens it, right? The first time you use it, it gets hardened. בעסק ראשון, הם מתחזקים ומתקשים הלכך ואגב לצורך יום טוב הוא. He says, even though it's for the needs of Yom Tov, like נמי דהת סולין עליהם מיהו, because we are using them to cook with that, right? Whatever, roast with that. כיוון בעסק זה נעשה כלי אסור. But since it becomes a utensil with this, usage, the first one, right, therefore it's forbidden. But אחי מעתינן בגמרא, says afterwards they bring in the Gemara, the Tanya in the bright side says, אחד מביא את האור ואחד מביא את העצים ואחד שופט את הקדרה, כולם חייבים. So it says right there, they're like this. One who brings the fire and one who brings the wood and one who puts the pot on top, they're all liable, right, for the labor of cooking, whatever. Bishdama kulhu ka'avdei maseh. So he says, I understand because they're all doing something there, right? Physically, actively, whatever. But it says, but it says, when it comes to placing the pot, what is he doing there, right? In other words, what's the labor that he's doing? So he says, Amar Resh Lakish, we're talking about a new utensil, right? A new pot. Mishum libun re'afim naguba. So the problem is, as we said, right, that you're hardening it, so you're making it to a kli. You make it into utensil. Katav Harosh me'acha mashma t'ilchata kelishna de'amar tama de'en amelabin ta'arafim mipnei shetzarich lechasman. So the Rosh says, right, that from here it implies that the reason why we forbid this is because you harden them, right, as we said, like we said regarding a new pot. Askinan mishum libun re'afim naguba ve'henu mishum chisum de'ika chiyuv chatat mishum makeh bepatish, right? So he says this is one of the prohibited labors on Shabbat, right? To make a new utensil, a person is liable to death on that, right? Can you imagine? Right? So it's a heavy duty thing, right? Okay, so about mishum tzarich levatko, but it says, but the issue of having to check it, lekach chiyuv chatat, there would not be a prohibition of, right? It wouldn't be so severe, like you're doing a forbidden labor. Mikan yesh limod. So from here you learn she'en levashel b'kdera chadasha b'yom tov. That means you should not cook with like a new pot on Yom Tov, right? Why? Because you're hardening it, right? As we said, right? But nowadays, by the way, this doesn't hold, this whole thing, right? They've already done the job, in the factory, right? Everything that needs to be done. So when you use your pot the first time, you're not preparing anything. Right? That's basically right. There's nothing to prepare there. It's ready to go as it is. So it says we see, right, that's the case, that you can't really use them with water. They don't hold water until you use them one time. Yerushalmi says, it says in Yerushalmi, it says the mod katan Rabbi Yehuda bar Rabbi Yishmael ore midochak lehavi kira chadasha mibet ha'oman leshapot aliyah kedera beyom tov ad kan hashor. Right. So this rabbi permitted, right, that what to bring a stove, a new stove, right, from the craftsman in order to use it, right, on Yom Tov. But he says it was like sort of a pressing case, right? In other words, they had no other choice, right? Something like that, right? That's Yerushalmi. Okay, so about Tosfot, but he says Tosfot, right? What about Tosfot? Katav achad b'kdera chadasha askinan. This is, we're talking about a new pot. Mishum libun re'afim laguba. So it says because as we said, right, you're hardening those plates. V'yesh nizarim shelo levashel b'tchila b'kdera lashay. It says some are also careful not to use a new pot, right? So, but he says this is not correct. De'acha b'kdera rikanit daz shayach ba libun re'afim. So it says because we're talking about an empty pot. So then it's relevant to talk about the issue of hardening the plates. The right, whatever they call those things. The shofta kodem shemevi amayim. That he places it before he brings the water. Aval kishemevashlim ba machal. But it says when you're cooking food in there, lo shayach ba libun rafim. You're not really hardening those plates, right? V'samag katuv. It says in the samag. Karasina b'Yerushalmi. That right. It says in Yerushalmi. Rabbi Yehuda bar Yishmael horad midochak lehavi kira chadasha bet ha'oman lishapot aliyah kedera b'yom tov v'yesh rotzim lilmod mikan. So as we said, right, this Yerushalmi allows this, in a pressing case, as we already mentioned. So he brings this Yerushalmi and he comments on that. He says like this, right, that some say that they want to learn from here. You're not allowed to cook in a new pot with Yom Tov, but Yom Tov. So therefore, what you got to do? You got to put it before Yom Tov, right, to harden it one time on the fire, and then it's ready to go for Yom Tov, right? But he says, there's a difference between our pots, right, and the stove, not the same thing. כתב בספר המצוות, יש רוצים ללמוד מכאן שאסור לבשל בקדרה חדשה ביום טוב, לכתחילה, אבל צריך לטיטה על האש מערב יום טוב, בלא מים, וכן כתב רבנו אבי עזרי, ואולי יש לחלק בין קדרה שלנו לקירה. So it says, he also says this, right, that maybe there's a difference between, right, our pot and the stove. והגאון מימון כתב בפרק ג' דברי הסמ"ג, he brings the words of the smag, this rabbi, ואחר כך כתב, אמנם הרם היה מזהיר לבשל בכל קדרה חדשה. But the Ram used to say, he says, he forbade every pot, right, no matter what. מערב יום טוב, right, so he would tell you, right, to do it before Yom Tov. אם רוצים לבשל בה ביום טוב, if you want to use it for Yom Tov for cooking. וכך כתב התוספות, that's what it says in תוספות, וכן נמצא בתוספות הרם. That's what's also in תוספות הרם. דאסר אם לא דוחק, unless it's like a pressing case, as we said, right? It's forbidden. כגון שאין לו מה יאכל. So what does it mean pressing case, right? What does it mean pressing? So it says it means you don't have what to eat, right? You don't have a meal. So you gotta, cook up something, right? You got no choice. So then we allow it. That's what he's saying, right? That's what the Rokach says also. Okay, ורבנו ירוחם כתב קדרה חדשה לבשל בה, ביום טוב כתבו התוספות שאסור. So this rabbi says, right, Tosfot says it's forbidden to do this. ודקדקו כן מדיאסור ללבן רעפים. And they learn that from the Talmud, right, which talks about hardening those plates, right, those whatever, tiles, right? Tiles is a better word, not plates, right? Whatever, okay, good. Tiles. Okay. כמו כן, הקדרה, same thing also applies to the pot, he says, and גמר תיקונם עד שיבשלו בה פעם אחת. So it says they're not really ready for usage until you cooked with it one time, That's the hardening, right, stage. פעם אחת, שאז מתחזקת אז it gets hard, ונראה בקדרות שלנו שכל תיקון בגמר שנתן היא בבישולן, בתנור של יוצרים, שאינו אסור, וכן אמה דבר. So he says, our ovens, so now, right, he comes and says, right, our ovens are different. I'm sorry, our pots, right? So what does that mean, right? It seems like, that we're lenient about this, Why is that? Because our pots don't get hardened this way. All the more so, by the way, our pots, because our pots, right, as we said, right, there's no preparation of a pot, by using it one time. No such a thing like that in our times. So obviously, right, this is not relevant, in our times. So says Bet Yosef, right, this is the custom, to be lenient in our times, right? So we never saw anybody who's stringent about this, you know what I mean? Now, in our times, as we said, right, our pots are different, they're not the same. So we don't have this, this doesn't exist by us, basically, right? It's a piece of history, whatever. But, it's more than history, it's Torah, you know what I mean? So it's still good to learn Torah, even though it's not so relevant, but still good. But I'd rather learn more practical things, but, whatever. But we'll do the best we can. Okay, let's see Shulchan Aruch, right? And we'll finish it off. The end of the chapter also. Right, so says Shulchan Aruch, לדידן מותר לבשל בקדרה חדשות, right, ביום טוב. For us, right, you're allowed to use new pots, right? No problem with that, as we said, right? Because, there's no preparation done by that. There's no, whatever. It's already done as it is, right? You're buying it, it's all ready made, ready to go, right? There's no, right? So says the Ramah here, v'yesh osrim, that some forbid, he says. Interesting, right? So there is also another opinion, so he brings here the source as the Rosh and the Tur, So he says customers to be stringent about this. Im lo unless he says it's a pressing case, as we say, right? So he says, therefore, the custom by us is like this, right? He says the Ramah, that we use it one time before Yom Tov, right? When we buy new pots for Pesach. So as we said, right, even though the Ramah says that they're stringent about this, but in our times, I think really there's really no reason to be stringent. You know what I mean? Because our pots are like totally different. Because their pots, what were they talking about? They're talking about clay pots, which had issues. What was the issue, by the way, with the clay pot? It was still very soft until you use it one time. So the problem was, that it would like leak water, if before you if you didn't harden it, it would leak, So that's why they had to, that's what they had to that's what they had to prepare like that. So in our times, we're using metal, so it's really not relevant at all, right? There's no or glass, whatever it is, right? Whatever it is, but the stuff that we use doesn't leak, whatever, doesn't need to be prepared. So therefore, obviously, right, the Ramah doesn't apply in our times, That's very clear. So therefore, right, don't worry about that. Right? Go purchase new pots, and right, use them as much as you want, whatever, right? Just make sure you put them into the mikveh. That you have to do, right? Besides that, you're good. You're good to go, right? By the way, does clay have to go into the mikveh? Oh, I'm testing you guys now, right? Does a clay pot have to go into the mikveh?
No.
That's it, right? So there's only two things that go into the mikveh, right? Metal and glass. That's it, right? No, nothing else. Everything else, don't waste your time. You know what I mean? You got better things to do.
What is the rule in electronics, like a toaster or something? Is there a way to?
Right, that's a good question. Yeah. So, I think I posted about this already. I'm sure I posted about this. Because somebody just asked me recently, he bought like some kind of a electric device, whatever. So the rule is like this, that people have found different solutions for this problem. Some people, like they try their luck, you know what I mean? Like, they just like immerse it into water and let it dry for a few days and hope for the best. But sometimes it doesn't work out for the best, this solution, you know what I mean? It doesn't always work. Sometimes you wind up like ruining the utensil, But so that's not a good idea. So no, whatever. I don't recommend it. There's also two other things, which are possible, or maybe three things, right? There are some who, will like lend it to a goy, not lend it, but give it to a goy as a gift and then borrow it from him, So therefore, it doesn't belong to him; it belongs to the goy. So it doesn't need to be immersed, right? That's also a solution which is brought down in the Shulchan Aruch, right? Especially as a temporary solution, you know what I mean? Until you can do something better. But in this case, there may be nothing better to do, whatever. So that may be the only, So right, that's one thing you can do. There's also some people, what they do? They take the utensil apart, and put it back together. So why is that right? Why is that significant? Because they say, well, I made the utensil, right? Not the goy. I made it, right? I took it apart until it wasn't functional, I put it back together. So I made the kli, right? Not the goy. So it wasn't made by a goy, right? That's another thing, right? Some people do that. I've seen somebody who actually did this in Israel, In Israel, everybody's a handyman, So they all know how to play with things, utensils. They know how to play with stuff. They're very good at those things, in Israel, right? They know. Everybody's handy over there. So that's another thing, right? But the truth is, right, that there's even a more simpler solution, because there are some poskim who hold that anything which is attached to the wall, is not liable for going into the mikveh. It's not obligated to go into the mikveh, right? So since we plug them into the wall, right, into the socket, so therefore they say it doesn't really need to be immersed. This kind of utensil, right, which gets plugged in. So what does that mean? When you're using the utensil, it's plugged in. You know what I mean? If that's the case, so then it's you don't, according to that opinion, you don't need to immerse it at all. So I give you some solutions, right? Whichever one fits you better. I don't know. Some people like to do a double, just to be on the safe side. They do two solutions, Whatever, right? Whatever you want to do, it's up to you.
Great solutions. I like it.
Okay, good. Okay, right. But the truth is, that people who are not so handy, whatever. I just tell them, just don't immerse it. they don't know how to do all those things, right? That we spoke about. I told them, I said, just do me a favor, just leave it, plug it into the wall, and just use it. Because it's attached to the ground, it's attached to the wall, so it doesn't need to be immersed. Whatever. So you can rely on that. If you got no other choice.
I got an air fryer, and there's a part to the air fryer that gets plugged into the wall, and then there's a part that like comes out. It's like a tray that comes out. Can I just immerse the tray, or will that count? Or
So what does it come out for? That's the question.
That's where you put the food.
Right, but when it's in use, it's plugged in, right?
So on camera.
You know what I mean?
All right, am I on? Let's see where I am. Okay, so this is the tray. There's a tray here. Backlighting. Tray here, right?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
The food is in there.
Yeah.
And then that goes into that. So that's all electronic. I can't immerse that. I can immerse the tray. So do I just immerse this, or do I not?
Where does the food go? The food goes into the tray only?
Food's in here, right? And then this plugs in this.
So the food doesn't go into the other part, right?
The whole thing goes in there to cook.
Right, but the food goes into the tray only.
Correct. Yeah.
So therefore you should immerse the tray. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, so immersing the tray will be enough?
Of course, because only where the food touches you need, right? That's it.
Excellent. Okay. I will do that.
God bless. Okay, Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow, B'ezras Hashem. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. They killed a lot more Nazis. I heard some good stories. 200 Nazis they killed, on just the last 2 days, right? On Independence Day and on Yom, right? I'm sorry.
You saw the UN updated the Gazans that were killed. They were up to 35,000. Now they're down to 25,000, and they
all right, whatever. Let them play around. You know what I mean? As long as we kill the Nazis, that's the most important thing.
I just think it's interesting.
I'm talking about the soldiers. You know what I mean? The soldiers, they're the ones who are.
Right. Well, they had. I guess it's like half as many women and children are they're reporting now. It's like crazy.
The truth is, they're all Nazis because they're all indoctrinated into that into that lifestyle. But at least we got to kill the armed Nazis. You know what I mean? The ones who are armed. At least we got to take care of them. Okay. Anyway, I'm not a politician, but I'll let you know when I'm running for prime minister. I'll let you know. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless. Laila Tov. Chazak Baruch.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Good night.